Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. Today I have a guest on. He was someone that came on a few months ago that people really liked, and he has a very spiritual way of approaching the planetary energy in the cosmos. His name is Ari Moshe. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. And so Ari is an evolutionary astrologer like I am, but he studied with Jeffrey Wolf Green's school versus Stephen Forrest. So a little bit of a different take on things, but at the end of the day, it's all about kind of our soul's purpose in this world and how we can live our best and conscious life. So today I'm going to be talking to Ari about Neptune and Saturn. They are both Neptune's already moved into Aries. Saturn will be moving into Aries. And I just watched an incredible talk that he gave, and I had to bring him on to talk to you all about all the research that he's done about how Saturn-Neptune interactions like this are impacting us in the world today. So if this is content you're interested in, I hope you stick around. I also want to make everyone aware that Ari, in addition to having a YouTube channel, which I will put below and is one that I watch regularly, frequently, Ari's starting, he kind of has his own astrology school, and he's starting a beginner foundation class coming up soon. So Ari, why don't you tell everybody about what your class entails and a little bit more about if people want to study and learn under you.
Sure. Thanks for that. So this is the first year training program. So it's the first year. This is my fifth year teaching this though. It's divided into two parts. Part one is the essentials course. So this is just learning the basic philosophy. It's a very important starting point to kind of let go of a lot of our previous learning. Many people who join this program are not new to astrology necessarily, but they've been studying. But this is a way to start from the very beginning from a soul evolutionary perspective. And then we do have many people that are completely new to astrology as well. So the basic philosophy, really, what does it mean to look at the natal chart? Meaning of the planets, signs, houses, and a lot of practice with planet sign house synthesis. Then part two, for those that continue on for the full year, is where we actually begin to learn interpretive work. A lot of work with the nodes, aspects of the nodes, the evolutionary astrology interpretive paradigm, transits and progressions. And we just do a lot of work. It's like 50, 60% just practice,
Yeah.
including at some point bringing in live volunteers. So it's an opportunity to delve very deeply into learning astrology from a soul perspective from the very, very beginning with solid guidance. We have video curriculum, online forum, workbook, transcription. And the heart of it is live meetings. We meet every week for Q&A. And then there are other classes, student-led organized practice groups. We have an alumni group that comes in to offer practice classes. And then we have an optional additional mentorship option with me. That's an add-on to the program.
Great.
So for those that are interested, there's that. You can check it out on my website. If you don't want to take the live program, you can just enroll in the self-study, which is also available for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was checking it out. I'm on Ari's email list, and I kind of was going through it, and it's a very impressive set of tools and classes that I think will, if you're willing to make that commitment to go in and dive in for a year, I think you are going to come out with the ability to, begin your own practice in time.
Maybe
So
not right away. That the first year really gives you the orientation, and then it's practice. We have a second year program as well. So it's a starting point for really going deep.
yeah, no, I know. I don't know about you, Ari, but I studied with Stephen for at least 3 or 4 years before I started doing readings for people
Mm,
professionally. And then, I'm
imagine.
always learning. I'm constantly learning. So
Yeah.
okay, well, I know people wanted to hear a little bit about what's going on. So today, as we're recording on April 1st, happy April Fool's Day, it is Neptune has already, shuffled on into Aries, which I'm already seeing some of the Neptune and Aries themes in the news, and I'm seeing some truths come out, some, people, saying like, whoa, I didn't know that was happening. So, do you want to set the stage and sort of talk a little bit about what was in your talk? Because I think that had so much relevant information.
Sure. Well, I'll speak to the more global political dimension of it. Um, what's interesting is when I was researching, I noticed that the last time Neptune was in Aries uh, was literally the day after or hours after the American Civil War began. So I mentioned that.
Right.
And then my phone was probably nearby, who knows? Because like the next day I'm on my phone and I'm seeing all of these videos on YouTube about why America is moving towards a civil war, and so and so is predicted a fascist regime, that we're moving towards a dictatorship, third world, and these are all kind of themes that I spoke about. I'm not predicting, just to be clear, a civil war, but
But
there
we're
are
kind of
certain,
in one. I mean, in
in
some
some
ways,
sense, yeah,
right? It's not a bloody one yet in this country, but
and it's sort of inevitable in terms of what's happening economically. And so there are two things that I want to say, and this is just a Saturn Neptune teaching. We can't do enough to make the world a pretty and happy place all the time. So there are cycles and processes that need to unfold. And I think the challenge of Saturn Neptune, if you think of Neptune as from one dimension, that which you have no control over, you know, it's like a snowstorm or an earthquake, just like it's happening and it affects everyone. Then you think of Saturn as the structural reality of your life, like the form, the template, that which we're cultivating and conditioning. There's a shift happening on the structural level, and it can feel like it's just all slipping out of our hand. Like there's a process that's unfolding right now that you can't stop. Um, this might feel very disheartening, and I'm just thinking, politically, if you want to be political and or say like I'm against this, I'm against that, there's a sort of heaviness and a disheartened quality that we might face in realizing that we're not actually powerful enough to change the course of what's happening. And that can really elicit a strong defeatist mentality, that things are just bad, falling apart. Like what's Neptune corresponds to atrophication. And anything that is not developed, anything that is not cultivated will eventually atrophy. So we could have the atrophication of democracy, the atrophication of morality and ethics. So that's what Saturn corresponds to. Neptune is deception. The masses can be deceived. I've given this analogy to Palpatine for those that are familiar with Star Wars. And I say this with respect, and not everyone's going to share the same political view or perspective of Donald Trump as me, and that's fine. My job is to speak my truth and make the astrological correlations to what's happening, because you can't learn astrology and look at the transits without understanding also what's happening in the world. They're inseparable. There's a lot of deception going on right now. And it's not just Donald Trump that's being deceiving. People are going to say, what about this? Yeah, well, that too. Um, but there's a movement happening that I think is beyond what most of us would even anticipate or imagine, because we're just not used to thinking in these ways. It's like, oh, that happens over there in that country, those people, or that was in that history. Well, history repeats itself, and there's really no empire that's ever stayed at its height indefinitely. And in fact, there are certain signs of what happens before an empire collapses. So the collapsing of an empire, Neptune, Saturn. Think of an empire as a sandcastle. Might be a really nice sandcastle with a lot of activity, but nevertheless, it's a sandcastle, and it takes one big wave to just knock it all down. So the illusion of success and grandeur and status and importance, all the things that you achieve or seek for as a nation, that can come and go very quickly, as it always has historically. It's never stayed anywhere. And when personally or collectively, when any entity begins seeking for greater and greater power and strength, it's like you're putting too much sand on the castle. It's like, oh, I want all of the beach to be mine, or I want this whole section of the beach to be mine. And that's the illusion. That's sort of the trick of, I'm valuing this nationalistic ideal. I'm valuing this idea of my country, my nation, my ethnicity. We give form this ultimate meaning and purpose. And I really want everyone to hear how how real and permeating that is, because we'll speak to the individual level as well. But whenever any society or nation or ethnicity or country, whatever group, Saturn corresponding to the divisions and the boundaries. So that also corresponds to race as well as your ethnicity, your nation, your country, the borders, that which divides and defines, really, and the structural reality of the world that you come into on all levels. So whenever you become so identified with that structural reality that you're only thinking about the importance, it's like you give deification and meaning. We are the chosen people or the chosen ethnicity, or our country is meant to be the best, or we're God's promise to the world. We've had the greatest delusional and thus ultimately failing efforts of countries and ethnicities and religious groups, Saturn as well. To clarify, religious philosophy or ideology would be a Jupiter thing, but then how a religion organizes itself as a society, that's Saturn. So some of the greatest religious, cultural, ethnic, national ideologies have done some of the crappiest things in the world, have caused some of the greatest suffering, but has been fueled by way of having given so much meaning to the structures that define them. And you see it all over the place. And I shared this during my talk, but it's arising, so I'll speak it now. I remember when I was in high school and I was in Jerusalem during one of the fast days where we actually commemorated the loss of the temple. Right. So for in the Jewish tradition, the loss of the temple, the temple was destroyed twice. And there's like this mourning because the first temple was much greater and more technologically advanced, which is true historically. Everything that's further back is a lot better because we are higher up in the yugas, we're higher up in the ages. So the first temple was more advanced. We lost that temple, and there were elders that remembered the first temple who were alive for the rebuilding of the second. This is about 500-ish or so BC.
Okay.
Right? And that second temple wasn't destroyed, just after the time of Jesus. And so it's been over 2,000 years where the Jewish people haven't had, their land, their temple, and there's been such a strong idealization of that. And amongst many religious people, there's that longing for the messianic times where the Messiah will come and that temple will be rebuilt, currently where the Dome of the Rock in the Alaska Mosque is located. That's where the western wall is the wall to where the temple used to be. And there's so much idealization. I remember that fast day being in Jerusalem and looking up at the mountain, kind of praying for or wishing for, idealizing the return of the temple. Interestingly, there's a teaching though in the Talmud that the temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, which is baseless hatred, that the Jews were hating each other. There's a lack of compassion and kindness. And as a result, because of how we were treating each other, the temple was destroyed. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of truth in that. And I think the truth of that expands far beyond any single ethnicity in just relation to itself. We keep on thinking about me and mine, my culture, my people, and things will get better when we are saved. Most Zionists were secular, by the way. And so the whole idealization around Zionism wasn't like some sort of like the Jews are destined for the land. They were even considering, I think, Uganda. But there was this belief that if we have our own land, if we as a Jewish people have our country, our nation, our borders, Saturn, anti-Semitism will end. It didn't happen that way. In fact, quite reverse. And as long as we're thinking of ourselves, this is an important Saturn to Neptune dimension. And then I'll return to deception and then I'll pause. If we're just thinking about ourselves, we become blind to the whole victim perpetrator fine line. The Neptune Saturn is I'm vulnerable, I'm weak, but I'm vulnerable, weak people, right? I'm being invaded by this other country, or my ethnicity is under attack, because you have Neptune and you can feel like there are no borders. Neptune has no boundaries. There's no difference. There's no differentiation with Neptune. So there can be this, again, deep sense of weakness that we are vulnerable. The Saturn borders and definition is weak. And then indeed, yeah, Jewish people, for example, have had pogroms and anti-Semitism in Europe for centuries. And you can have many, many other examples historically of peoples where there has been just a sense of we're vulnerable, we're weak. And then that becomes sort of a shadow because we're weak, right? And this is Neptune. Neptune is everything. We often miss this component of Neptune, but I want everyone to understand this because we can apply this for ourselves. Because we're weak and unprotected, now I got to make sure that we're never going to be hurt. Now I got to make sure that we're strong, right? So Neptune is like the immune system. Right? So if there's a weak immune system, you're going to get attacked. You're going to be vulnerable. You're going to be thrown wish-wash all over the place. But there's so many examples where Neptune kind of goes from like the weak, small, you're sort of just hiding, you're a fly on the wall, you just go along with the flow. And then you sort of build that immune system, you build your strength, and you build a strong sense of self. That's not the end of the journey. That's just a part of the Neptunian journey of trying to figure out how to deal with existence. It's a part of the journey of how to reconcile with the existential question of existence itself. Okay, we were weak, now we're going to be strong. So I'm giving a lot of meaning, Neptune, ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose in our country, in our nation. And then we end up recreating unconsciously because we're the weak and vulnerable people. We end up creating the conditions that we actually received. So again, in my own perception and view, and this is not to negate the fact that many Jews have been killed for even in Israel by Arab people, absolutely, and that October 7th absolutely happened, which can further validate the perception. Yeah, look, we're going to get, they want to kill us if we stop the control, Saturn, authoritarianism, we're going to get stabbed, proof, point in case. And yet it creates this total shadow where genocide becomes justified. Ethnic cleansing, Saturn, Neptune, cleansing, Neptune, washed away. It's like it was never there. Also, it can become this dynamic where there's a total missing. It's like they don't exist. Just boom, not there. There are people that can live in Israel, depending on where in the world, depending on what media you're following, where there's no compassion or empathic attunement to the thousands of children in Gaza that have been killed or have lost loved ones or have lost limbs, to the lack of care that because there's not enough medical support and humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. It's easy to just be like, nope, not happening.
Right.
And if it's happening, here's a Neptunian delusion. Not happening. Well, Israel needs to defend itself. Look what they did to us. This is war. This is just war, Ari. Or some sort of gross idealization of, well, this has to happen anyway, because look what it's very easy to kind of Neptune deny the truth because we think if we accept the truth, suddenly that's going to invalidate our own sense of security. So we can live in these political, social, national, ethnic bubbles. And what's interesting is I see that on all sides, to be honest. And it's a very tender area to speak to. I've been feeling activated to speak to it, kind of sort of a challenge, to speak the truth, but one that actually leads us towards compassion, because it's very easy for my words to alienate people that feel very threatened. And I've gotten feedback from people that live in Israel, Jews that live in the West Bank, even, that feel very threatened and unsafe, who've lost loved ones. And so there's something around, there is suffering, you are suffering, and these people are suffering. And what does it take to actually recognize that there's going to be no healing until we expand our borders to include all of us, to include humanity, to actually begin to care and recognize, Neptune, you are the same as me. It's hard to do that because we want to sort of generalize. I've been really into these talks where I see Arabs and Palestinians in many cases who have lost loved ones. It's very easy in those instances to become more polarized and say, okay, I'm not going to talk to the other side because they just killed my son. But these people in the actual experience of having lost, they realize if I don't actually turn towards forgiveness, the violence is going to continue because I feel so much hate. I'm just going to continue to fight for my nation. So there are two things happening with the Saturn Neptune, and I'm using Israel and Palestine as an example. We can see the delusional fear and strengthening of our own national borders, and the duality of becoming very strong and becoming very weak. And there might be a process that you really can't, certain things you can't stop. But then the question is, we can't stop what's happening in the world. But what is the light of truth that we can give attention to? What is true that we can begin to cultivate and orient ourselves towards? And so then the truth would be, which is also what's happening amongst many people, which is eventually what's going to take hold, which is where the planet's going to ultimately, eventually, years down the road, change, is where we are walking the path of forgiveness, of dissolving the inner and the outer barriers that we've created to recognizing our sameness, and universalizing Neptune, our sense of security, boundaries, protection, that me and my people are not safe unless you and your people are. Because if I need to affirm a belief in safety that requires your deprivation, that means I'm creating a Neptune reality. I'm projecting a world where safety equals deprivation, my gain equals your loss. And that's not God. That's not truth. What we're moving towards is a world where safety is safety, and thriving and living in the temporary illusion of time and space doesn't have to be met with all these made up conditions of fear and separation. So this practice of let's orient our, and Saturn is conditioning. So conditioning a reality in our minds, structuring our thoughts, creating habits that are about forgiveness and faith and trust, and really this internal orientation. What is the role that I am to play in a part of this greater healing? Because things are going to get bad in the world, and we can feel disheartened, and we can sort of in a futile way try to fight the fight. I think there's only so much that we can do, but we should not let ourselves get disheartened, because we have a role to play. That's really where the truth actually is. So I'll say one more thing, because I started with Trump. I didn't go all the way. In the Palpatine story, in I think Star Wars, it's in the prequels. Palpatine was the emperor, and everyone loved him, but no one knew that he was a Lord Sith, a Sith Lord. Even the Jedi were deceived, and eventually, it took a while for the Jedi to kind of put two and two together and to kind of realize the unthinkable. Like, oh my God, he is what he is, which is the highest expression of darkness you could imagine, meaning most people can't fathom that. And, it ends up Palpatine is actually Lord Sidious, whatever. Yeah. And it's like the worst out there. I think we are in general naive about evil. Um, I hold it in this way. There's only God and there's only truth. That's the only reality. And so evil itself doesn't have its own individual existence. If you can say it exists, its existence entirely feeds and thrives on the denial of what is true. And it's beyond my comprehension. But what I will identify as such is that which exists in a chronic state of separation and denial of truth, and it needs to strengthen in that denial in order to affirm the falsity of its existence. And again, we all have experiences of kind of being in that state, but most of us don't live there chronically. And that's why it's incomprehensible for us to imagine people like Hitler or Putin. And I'm not even speaking to the current situation with Putin. This is the guy that will blow up buildings full of civilians just for his own political gains. It's incomprehensible. Trump is just in that same exact category. That's coming from my own inner perception. And he's deceiving us and he's playing the game. And so we won't see him or think of him in that way. And there are millions of people, obviously, that see him as a savior. Well, people saw Hitler as that. The issue with Saturn-Neptune is the deception of form, because we're looking for the exact same form. We're looking for the replication of the exact same form that the deception took the last time. Or we want to look at the national hatred to look the way that nation or that country, or we're these people. We can't act this way. Oh no, well, Hitler was this, or it was more overt. It's very, very hard right now in any part of the world practically to be able to identify a very clear-ended good guy and bad guy, because the politics and the groups within every ethnicity are actually there's a lot of corruption everywhere. The Democratic Party in the United States is very, very corrupt as well. So there's something happening right now where it's like truth and illusion have been mixed together for a long time. And it's not like a very clear cut good guy, bad guy kind of situation, which is why I think a part of this process is the inevitability of a certain momentum playing out. And the truth will be revealed eventually. And it's important for me to speak honestly about who Donald Trump is. And of course, in this country, we're having mass, people, many people are being deported without due process. It is not safe to protest, speak your truth, even anti-Israel. That's called anti-Semitic, and then it's being justified for being put in jail in a different country. This is actually happening. Um, lawlessness, lawlessness astrology is a part of Saturn-Neptune. You take Saturn, which is rule of law, and then Neptune is, for a person with a Saturn Neptune aspect in your chart, like a strong or a tight one, oftentimes you'll have like a condition where, maybe your parents were drunk and they weren't there. Or the opposite could be true as well, right? Very strict and rigid. It's like in an arbitrary way. But the lack of law and order, or like anarchy, anything can go. Elon Musk is defined as a capitalist anarchist. And I'm not sure if he's defined that, but that's essentially what he is if you look at the truth of his actions. And there are people there in this country who are basically waiting for lawlessness so that they can begin to fight the good fight. People who assaulted officers have been let out of jail. This is what a dictatorship regime does, creating people. So when all of the laws and the rules of order kind of fall away, which will happen if Trump can create a reality where everything falls apart and then blames that on some kind of external cause, it'll then motivate and rally people to fight with him for that cause. It'll be like an extreme condition. This is what he's trying to create. And within that is economic collapse, Saturn, Neptune, which then further polarizes the economic reality where there's no middle class, but an extreme upper class and an extreme lower class, but nothing in the middle, which makes it easier to control the people. So I'll pause there. These are the collective dynamics that I see happening with Saturn, Neptune. I'll end it with this statement. It's important for me to speak to it, not because I'm trying to be politically overtly, but because to me, this is what's happening. And it's not helpful to be naive or not aware of it. And I think astrologically, it benefits us in being able to see the correlation and to recognize, oh, this is a cycle. And this has happened before, but this is a pretty strong one. This will come and this will go. And what's the evolutionary intention? Where can we grow and evolve through this?
So if you watch Ari regularly, or if you've ever, taken in his work, he is actually like one of those really peaceful, non-political astrologers. Like I remember watching you before the election and you were so you were so careful. You were really careful to kind of say, this there's delusion on both sides. Like you're very good at that. And I
Very Libra.
very Libra, as somebody with the Sagittarius rising big mouth and Pluto in the ninth house, like sometimes, I Uranus on the midheaven, I take some risks, while I'm listening to you, I'm like, wow, it's so, and when I watched your course or like he had like a workshop that I listened to this weekend, I was like, wow, Ari's stepping into a new place where he can't hold everybody's delusion.
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, wow, this is really a new voice, right? And so it's so interesting to kind of look and see the evidence around us, how much people are just almost like overnight changing. Like things are moving and evolving, and things are starting to speed up now with Neptune moving into Aries. And so I was heartened and moved by your stories because you still hold space for the fact that there is no ultimate truth, that this is complicated stuff. but it shouldn't be complicated to send an innocent person to a work camp in El Salvador. Right. So that shouldn't be complicated. But does that mean that Chuck Schumer is an effective leader? No,
Mm.
he's not. So it's kind of and were there corrupt Democratic politicians that have helped bring us to this moment in history? Yes. And, I actually think that the corruption of the Republican Party is what brought on so much anger to get us to this place on the Republican side. I don't personally think it was a healthy move in that direction. But what struck me when you were talking, I wrote down many different things, but one of the things that people can understand is victim and perpetrator. And Pisces, Neptune and Pisces is very victimy. And we've all seen a rise of victimhood over the past decade. Easily we can point to people who are just outraged about things that, why are you outraged about that? Like, just sort of like everybody feeling like they're so much more entitled to things, coming from a root of feeling that they have been persecuted because things aren't going their way. And it is very easy for that victimhood when Neptune moves into Aries to then be like, I am now
Exactly.
not going, that's the perpetrator, where
I've
it's,
had enough. Yeah.
I've had enough. And I see that also, the piece that we're not bringing in here, and I imagine it's very confusing for people, is Pluto. Because prior to a lot of what's happening now, it was like power to the people, and Pluto and Aquarius is like this new energy and this new dawning. And that's all still true, but it is a long cycle. And we're seeing how all of these planets interact. I did a video about how easy it is to miss the big picture about Pluto and Aquarius throughout history and just be like, oh, it's the French Revolution, the American Revolution, right? But what was Saturn doing? What was Uranus doing? Right? Those outer planets dance together, they interact together, and they all flavor things differently.
Yeah.
And so I think about the fact that who is in charge right now? Well, not only do we have this kind of old school Pluto and Capricorn kind of somewhat dying vestiges of power grabs, right? Like, but we also now have these technocrats that were not prominent on the scene. They were behind the scenes. And now they are front and center,
Mhm.
really challenging and destroying things. And they remind me very much of this victim perpetrator dichotomy too, because a lot of these people have these stories of being bullied as a kid, or they couldn't get the girl, right? Like, and that's,
Technocrat are, just so I make sure, that's like the technological, like the social media people,
it's
all the
the
rich guys.
technology
Got
billionaires.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's all these people that are pulling the strings now
Yeah. There we
that were
go.
not elected by the people.
Right. Yeah,
And,
exactly. They
right.
weren't the people that got like the hot girl in high school.
Right. Exactly. They were the ones that were bullied. And,
Mhm.
if you read,
Elon Musk for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
right, you read his background, he was abused as a child, right? And so there is this split where it's the victim, and now I'm on top. I'm the perpetrator. So that's kind of the unhealthy, like anybody who has suffered abuse in their life, which I've been very clear in my channel that that is part of my background. You have a choice in some ways, which is to heal that abuse, to get across um, in your life where you're not perpetrating, like you're not doing it again. It's not a cycle. And there are so many people out there that do not perpetrate. They do not continue the cycle of abuse. But there are plenty of stories where that does happen. And I think collectively, that's one of the things that we are looking at right now is the bully, the people that felt victimized in some way, feeling empowered and
Exactly.
not in touch with their humanity in the same way.
And it's so tempting to identify with that sense of smallness. Um, Only the most aggressive people are those who believe themselves to actually be very small and weak. That's why we turn towards aggression. And so for us, there's great importance in really shifting that sense of smallness to the truth of our greatness, and that our greatness isn't in having power over. It's actually greatness is in our connection to who we are, to the source, to where love or truth or meaning wants to actually act and live through us. Like we all have a purpose. And Neptune and Aries is like, you have to step into that purpose and strengthen your availability to execute that, to embody that in the world. To Pluto and Aquarius too. I think it can really highlight, and I agree, there's a tendency for us to idealize Pluto and Aquarian age, more often than not, evolution means facing all of the shadow.
Yeah.
And so in context, we have Pluto and Aquarius, which highlights the sectarian groups, like my group versus your group. Um, you know, are you in the club? Are you out of the club? If I say this on social media, am I going to be canceled? Right. Actually, at the time, we have Mars moving towards its opposition with Pluto. Mars rules that Aries. I think that heightened sense right now of polarization, I think a lot of us are afraid of just, if I am who I am and I don't, fit into this political group or party or ideology, will I still belong? That's like the deeper fear of Aquarius, not belonging, not being a part of, not being included, being outed, being excommunicated. I think we're doing that to each other, but we're also afraid of that happening to ourselves. And so we're staying small.
I mean, I'll just interject right now that, like, as you were talking, I can't help but think, like, is this okay? Like, is it okay to put this out on the internet?
I
Like,
know, right?
we have grown up. I mean, I think I'm a little older than you, but for the most part, we're a similar generation, and we've grown up with just like taking it for granted that we have freedom of speech, which is
Mhm.
is that still the case when someone writes an op-ed in their school paper? If you're not familiar with this story, a
Uh,
girl, a Palestinian protester who was from Tufts. I mean, she's
oh
from
no,
the
yes, yeah. Please
country,
tell
and
the
she
story.
wrote an op-ed about how she wanted the Tufts to not support um, Israel.
Right.
And a bunch of people in plain clothes just took her off the street. They weren't even in police outfits or anything. They just took her. And without any kind of due process, they've
Was it
got
ICE? Those are ICE agents, right?
agents. Yeah.
Is she okay
And
now?
she's still in custody. No, so this is happening a lot more than we realize. Part of this is to instill fear so people
Exactly.
will speak
Exactly.
out.
That's my sure.
And I am not immune from that. Like, you're not immune from that. We have children. These are our opinions. This is for entertainment purposes only. I
Yeah.
say these things because how do we go up against people who are so much more powerful than us? But
We
then
can't.
also, how do we not speak out about it? Right?
This is the Neptune dilemma. Like we can't, right? And then it's like the fear is like, well, that power is too great. It's gonna squelch us. I'm so glad you brought this up because I thought of this too. I'm like, I've never in my life actually even had an inkling of a thought of like, is it safe for me to say the
Speak
right?
my
What in a year from now, can I even be this vocal? How easy might it be to put my YouTube channel down or whatever? And so I think I was listening to a talk from Marianne Williamson, and she was kind of speaking to this. It was a great talk, and I'm so appreciative of just how she's showing up right now. She even said in the Course in Miracles, there's no order of difficulty in miracles. And so if we think of it on the level of how we've solved problems in the past, uh, we're in a difficult situation because our human capacity is not strong enough. And even if we organize, it's hard to defeat a fascist regime that's got a lot of power right now. So there's something greater than ourselves that will make it through. Our
Yes.
power is in that greatness. And there's no level of difficulty. There's no limit. There's no mountain too great for that power. And so connecting with that power and seeking to orient towards that. And so if we're doing our work, and we know when we're doing our work, like I know I brought up like, notice when you gave that feedback around, oh, Ari's not as concerned with being with holding everyone's illusion. That actually impacted me. I didn't that crystallized something in my soul. I never quite framed it as clearly as you just expressed it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm exactly meant to do this. This is exactly what I'm meant to be doing right now. And when we're in touch with that, we will know that there's a great power and strength that carries us, that has our back. It doesn't mean we know the outcome, because some people might be doing exactly what they're meant to do and they will get arrested. But I think if we're in touch with our purpose, there will be peace. And this is what I really want to emphasize for all of us. I hear that story about that woman from Tufts that was arrested. It just brings up so much sadness and grief, the fear, and also the disheartened. Like, that's exactly what they want us to feel right now. And it's intentional. I want everyone to be clear-eyed. This is all intentional. Arrests like these, the fear it induces, how it feels for us, it's all intentional. It wants to lower our immune system. It wants to make us weaker. So we can internalize all of that as, okay, here's a temptation to give into the illusion, to become afraid. I'm not going to. What's my purpose? What's my path? And this is why, in me having this calling, for example, I'm very, very mindful. The personal challenge for me is I don't want to become another voice screaming or trying to prove a rightness
Right.
relative, because everyone has their personal experience and their suffering and their pain. And my orientation is there's something that's true for all of us. And I want us to be able to see it. And I'm not going to exclude or deny any. And so there's a challenge for me in not wanting to alienate anyone. In fact, I'm wanting to bring everyone here. And at the same time, I can't agree with people's illusions. So the journey is to not fall into a right versus wrong kind of mindset, because then we're fighting the war that no one's going to win. But to really know what is our purpose and to strengthen ourselves in the frame of that purpose, so we get really good and really strong, really vibrationally congruent with what we're here to do. So like the immunity of Neptune, like when we have a strong immune system, let's say you do some like, what's that breathing exercise, right? That you get in the cold water. I forgot what it's called. Um, you know,
Breath of Fire
or
or
that guy who like goes in cold water.
oh, I don't know that one.
Um, you do your things that builds your immunity, right? You do your yoga, you do your cold plunge, your running, your meditation, your sauna, your breath exercise, your workout. Um, all you take your vitamin D and you get your sunlight. Like, these are just like health practices that make us more immune, right? We get sick less. We can withstand more stress because we're building our system from within. That's what Neptune's all about. Again, the idea of atrophication. So we have to build our immune system so we're vibrating clearly relative to our purpose, who we're designed to be. That's the only way, which is another way of saying cultivating our connection to love and how love wants to animate our lives. That's where our joy, that's where our passion, that's where we have endless energy. That's where we can show up and show up and show up and show up. And we're guided by something that is beyond this world. That's our only defense, Aries, against what we otherwise have actually no control over.
Yeah. So it's I remember listening, when this weekend listening to your talk, and it was like, do you have any questions? And most of the questions, at least early on, were like, well, when is it going to get better? How, give me
Right.
something to hold on to. So my guess is that most of the people watching are feeling the same way because, I do believe that many of us are living in that sense of like paralyzation, fear, trying to move through. And it's no longer where we can live. As Neptune and Saturn move into Aries, there is a sense of, okay, we don't need to be a perpetrator, and perpetrators do not need to be the ones that squash everybody, because there is something true about the fact that narcissists burn themselves out.
Yeah.
Narcissists, on the whole, if you study them, they do not live successful, happy lives. A lot of narcissists ends up in prison. Okay. And I'm not predicting that for what the people in charge now, but there's a great deal of narcissism kind of floating around. And so the hope that I want to give people and the kind of recognizing that this is something that the Saturn Neptune, like you said, the wave comes in and the castle falls, right? Like we're seeing things accelerate, we're seeing things happening quickly. We're also seeing truths coming out quickly. We are seeing people begin to stand up. Like I said, you're a great example of somebody that I do not feel like was really a very strong voice in the game. And here you are like the most powerfully articulate person that I've had on that is talking about these things from a political standpoint and imbuing it with spirituality and recognizing that, first of all, we are humans. We do not have the answers. I can't tell you when this is all going to be over. I can tell you it will be over. I can tell you there will be a new outcome. I can tell you astrologically that in 10 years, we will be in a completely different place. And what we do now in the next 2 or 3 years is going to help inform what 10 years from now looks like. And I do not necessarily predict that 10 years from now, we're going to be living in a fascist regime. I don't. But is it a possibility? Absolutely. And so that's the motivation. That's the higher cause of Aries, is to step into your power, to recognize what's worth fighting for. Recognize and be courageous, not fearful. Be courageous and speak your truth. Now, this is my truth. It's not the universal truth. This is your truth. It's not the universal truth. We try to hold space for everybody's truth. Will I get a lot of like, trolly comments on this? Absolutely. Is there a part of me that thinks it might get suppressed in the algorithm? Absolutely. But do I also care right now? All I care about is I do care about the safety of my family. And if all of a sudden they start going after small YouTubers, this is getting taken down, right? Like I'll be honest with you, like I don't need that. But at the same time, like in this moment in time, Neptune is in Aries, and I woke up today, scrolling the headlines to find out there's a father of a 5-year-old who is legally in this country who got shipped to El Salvador. That's not okay, right? And then I read the comments on the story and people defending it. And that's where I think, like, okay, this person, there is some sort of disconnect, that they are not connected to their humanity, that they want to defend. That should just be a universal truth,
Right.
that that's not acceptable, right?
Right.
But there's a justification, and that is that Saturn Neptune divide, where
Right.
we're not being true to ourselves. I mean, like we being somebody who can't, they've lost touch with their humanity because they've been so hurt.
Right.
And I agree with you that forgiveness is the path, but
Mhm.
that forgiveness, you can forgive people and still walk a powerful path where you call out things that are hurting other people. Another headline that I read today was that they're going to seek the death penalty for Luigi.
Oh,
And it's interesting, right? They've made it a federal case. Why? Right? Like
make an
what is,
example out of it. Yeah.
you're right. So it's really, there's a lot of powerful messages being sent right now, but I really do believe this Pluto undercurrent, this Pluto in Aquarius is still there. And I'm starting to see, with the economic impacts of things, messaging that from people, especially in the comments and stuff. I do read comments because I want to get a sense of like the zeitgeist. I want to get a sense of what other people outside of my bubble feel.
Right.
And there is this more coming together and anger about wealth inequality that it was not breaking through before.
Mm.
And that wealth inequality, the power inequality, wealth really is just power, right? And to your point, I also read something this weekend about how, like you said, there's like, they don't want a strong middle class. They want the really, really elite wealthy people, and they want the really, really, struggling working poor people, right? And then so anyway, I'm sort of going off on too many tangents, but the positive thing I want people to take away is I think we have more power than we realize right now with Pluto and Aquarius. And I think also things moving into Aries, there is an understanding we have to find our own inner power and what we believe is worth fighting for.
Well, to that question, because it kind of lingers, right? Like, okay, but like it seems like this is a pretty hard time.
Yeah.
What's the positive, right? And when will this end? it's so easy. I mean, when I listen to the news or read, it's so easy to feel just like this overwhelm of emotion, anger, despair, hurt. It's like, there are 10,000 ways in which we're being potentially drawn outside of ourselves, outside of our soul. And that choice to give into fear is a thing that I want everyone to understand. Because where fear arises from an Aries point of view is actually the threshold where we are to step into greater strength. Like jumping out of a airplane to go skydiving. There's fear because you're doing something new. I mean, it's not the best example. It's an Aquarian
A great
example.
example, I think. I think it really brings home. I
Yeah.
just want to interject that, like,
Yeah.
the Pisces fear and the Aries fear are two different fears.
Yeah, they are.
And we're stepping away from the sort of nightmares, overwhelming, like, I can't make anything out. We're living in the dark,
We're
jumping out
just not, we're
fears.
not as used to being as alive. It's, I'm writing this article now. I've been writing a lot about these things. Just how this, personally, this transit is a spiritual maturation and also a loss of innocence. Um, there's a sense on the spiritual journey of like trust and surrender, and it's all going to work out. And these are true principles, but if they're applied indiscriminately, they can be a little bit confusing. Because Neptune and Aries is also really connecting our own will with divine will. It's actually about being engaged. And if we're not engaged, then again, we are faced with that smallness. Like the strategy of Neptune and Pisces, which contains everything, right? Isn't necessarily going to um, have the same perspective of Neptune and Aries, which is a very clear, your connection to the divine is through your purpose. So that there's a fire, there's an engagement, there's an activation that's calling us forward right now. The fear wants to keep us in old patterns. The fear wants to keep us in a state where we can't change ourselves. Like when we believe life sucks, we're not going to make any positive changes. We won't eat well. We won't work out. We won't work on our business. We won't go for our goals or dreams, that things that we love the most. We won't invest in good things. Like we give up on our life and doing what we care about when we think life is just falling apart. And that can become a cancer that takes over our minds if we don't tend to it. So the positive side to Neptune and Aries isn't, and of course, all things pass in time and their cycles, and you can look astrologically at that. But the real positive teaching for us is you are the positive part of this transit. And I want everyone to really actually hear that, because we're so used to this sort of passive idealistic thinking. Something's going to happen to change and it's all going to get better. And this is the point. We created this situation by living in a perpetually morally ambiguous state where it's like here in the country, vote for the one that's less corrupt, right? Or, you know, oh, I don't like what they're doing, but look, I guess I have no other choice, right? They suppress all the other candidates or whatever, like there's been so much ambiguity that we're at a point right now in our own personal lives. Maybe we're so used to not living our truth. Maybe we're so used to not living our passion, to not prioritizing our deepest joy, the things that are most important. There's a very good Aries teaching where, relative to the and the Saturn thing too, like the conditioning of mindset. If we fall into certain mental and emotional patterns, um, and we want to change, sometimes there's value in just saying, "I'm going to do this right now," like not thinking, just doing it. Like I'm gonna in five. You don't want to get out of bed. 5 seconds. One. You just say in 5 seconds, I'm going to get up. Like you just command yourself, and you don't think. You just make the choice. Um, I don't want to clean my room. I'm just going to start. Like there's a certain, I don't want to write this article. Well, I'm just going to sit down right now. Open mic. Like there's a certain momentum where like the energy flows simply when we make the decision to do it. And there can be a sort of like, oh, but I want everything to be easy. I want it to all flow. And I think the world is kind of teaching us that's not necessarily the most spiritual attitude, or that's not an attitude that's going to work all the time. Sometimes surrender means surrendering to the need to act. Like, I'm surrendering to the truth that nothing's going to happen unless I happen. So, I mean, that's the positive side of this. And it's a beautiful side. It's a powerful side. There's like activation, there's joy, there's inspiration relative to Pluto and Aquarius. There's creating a whole new way of life, communities and groups and people coming together to do something that is not in the mainstream. I mean, we're going to find so many awesome things happening, but we need to make it a choice to actually stoke that for ourselves and for each other. That's the point.
Right. I completely agree. And I think that's why you and I have made this decision to speak out and not stay quiet right now, because now is the time. I mean, this eclipse and Neptune and Aries are in my third house, right? So
Mm,
you think about
there we
like,
go.
what are you being called to do? Right? What is your calling at this time with the Aries energy? Where is Aries? What house is it in for you? So and I don't know. We could have our channels completely taken away from us in like a heartbeat, right? You've spent years on yours. I've, had mine for a year now, and I've cultivated this wonderful chance. So that does remind me, please go to my website and sign up for my email list, because if that goes poof, it goes poof, and like, how will you find me? How will I find you? And I appreciate this community. I mean, I have people that make comments like almost on every single video. Like, I have that core group of people, and I'm sure you do too. And like, I've never met them. I don't even know their first names
Right.
in many cases. But it's like, oh, there she is. Hi,
Mhm.
like, and it's this sense of like, we are in it together. This is a community, right? And that is the thing that I want to keep going. It really doesn't matter to me. I don't like looking at myself on Zoom all day. Like, frankly, like, it's tiresome. But what I do like is knowing that I'm not alone, right? Like, that there are people out there that I'm motivating, that I can connect with. And I think that is a higher expression. I don't know, where was the Aries eclipse and where's this Neptune? Where is it for you?
In my seventh house.
Okay.
um Ruled by Mars and Libra. And my seventh house is it, Pisces is on my seventh house cusp. So exactly what you said, not needing to hold other people's illusions. The seventh house agreeability thing is something that I think is clearing for me.
It's a good reminder that we all have to look at our individual path and what we're here to contribute during this time. And I don't necessarily want people to fall into fear or depression. All the things that we're talking about here are things that, you can pick up the news and read. You can get lost in the news and feel fearful. But the bottom line is, I think what's interesting is looking at the historical patterns of Neptune and Aries, or Neptune, Saturn, and now throwing in the Aries piece of it. This is a time of dramatic change. It is a time of empires falling. It doesn't necessarily
Getting
mean,
bigger, maybe then falling. Yeah.
yeah, right. It doesn't necessarily, right. There's so much, the astrology podcast also did this like 8-hour thing, which I have
I
not got.
heard. Oh my God.
But the parts that I've listened to so far, like, this is their new thing and I'm really enjoying it, but like, I have to do it in the background, so I can't always like absorb it all, because who I don't have 8 hours to sit there and listen to a talk. But it's very well researched about what happens historically with Saturn and Neptune, and what are these different cycles, and there's so much political upheaval.
Huh.
So I think the big takeaway from this talk, hopefully for people, is this is actually all happening in concert with our higher good. The individual stories of people, we don't know what their charts are. We don't know what they're supposed to learn from this. We don't, and I'm talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the people who've been shipped off, like, because I've been sort of meditating on that, like, wow, like that, like, what's going on there? Like, what's the story? What's their chart look like? Like, it's really interesting. Um, I'm trying to stay in my compassion. I'm trying to understand forgiveness, meditate on forgiveness, meditate on, fear. Some of these themes that you've touched base on quite eloquently, and understand this is part of a greater cycle that in time we will understand more clearly. But right now, we have to do our inner work.
Hmm. Indeed. Yeah. I had a thought a moment ago. I just lost it. Um,
Well, while you're thinking of it, I'm gonna pose this to you.
yeah.
What should this be called? Should it be called loss of innocence? Should it be called
Oh, wow.
empire's fall? Should it be called this too shall pass? Like what
Hmm.
one of the things that as we've been talking, the burnout of delusion.
Well, I remembered. So I'll share what I remembered. Then I'll. Um, neutrality is a big part of learning, right? Right. There's a sort of not a neutrality that is passive and uncaring, like a head in the clouds, but a neutrality that says, yeah, that's happening, right? There's sort of an acceptance. Um, Suffering is happening and even feeling it, but just to kind of stay in a neutral place, so that the neutrality relative to the comings and the goings of life, not so that we don't act, but so that we kind of stay clear minded in what is my role. It's when we get really charged up about something that we lose that clarity of mind and we become a weak leader. So that quality of just sort of not grasping Neptune, not holding on so tightly to the trick, to that which is actually trying to instill fear in us so we can nurture a clear state of mind. For a title,
Mhm.
Neptune, Saturn. Oh man, I can't.
No worries.
Um,
I was just as we were talking, I was like, oh,
these
I like somebody a little
massive deception, the loss of innocence, and your highest purpose, something like that.
yeah. We'll see what I land on.
Yeah,
So, all right, Ari. Well, this has been fascinating. I think if you like Ari's style, definitely check out his teaching that he's initiating right now. It's a year-long program, and you probably learn a lot. Any other final thoughts
that is
or?
all. Thanks so much for sharing this time with me, Dabney. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I really do appreciate it. Okay. So as always, there is a reason and a season for it all, even when it feels uncomfortable. And the universe is conspiring to help us. So until next time, stargazers.